too loud? No. Okay, thank you guys for coming. I'm really excited to be moderating the international panel. My name is Camila Casio. I'm one of the animal law LLMs here at Lewis and Clark. So I'm just gonna briefly introduce our speakers and we'll just get right to it. Natasha Dolezal directs the International Animal Law Program at the Center for Animal Law Studies. She speaks widely to international audiences about animal legal education, and she directed the Kenya Legal Project, where she co-taught the first animal law course in Kenya and assisted Kenyan lawyers in their efforts to enhance legal protections for animals. Prior to joining the center, she was the Associate Director for Government Affairs at Oregon Health and Science University. She continues to be involved in local state advocacy efforts on behalf of animals as a board member of Humane Oregon, an organization whose mission is to help promote humane treatment of animals through the political process. Vimbai Chinoda is a Zimbabwean attorney and the founder and director of Speak Out for Animals, an organization that seeks to educate and advocate for animal protection policies and legislation in Africa. She works with Parks and Wildlife Management as a prosecutor under the Ministry of Justice and was a staff attorney that handled the Cecil the Lion case. She currently focuses on educating Zimbabwean and university students, recent law graduates, and rural communities in animal law. Alice DiConcetto is an animal law fellow in the Animal Law and Policy program at Harvard Law School. Her research focuses on the effect of US agricultural policies on farm animal welfare and has touched upon the legal status of animals in Abrahamic religions. She holds a dual bachelor's degree in political science and Latin American studies, a master's degree in economics and law from Sciences Po in France, and animal law LLM. She has studied at the Universidade de Brasilia in Brazil and at NYU. She served as a consultant for the first animal law clinical project at Sciences Po Law School in France. So, really excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Good morning, everybody. You've got your donuts, so you're ahead of me. Clearly, am I doing it? I am doing it wrong. Okay. Good morning again, and thank you all for being here. My name is Natasha Dolezal. I'm the Director of International Animal Law at the Center for Animal Law Studies. And before I begin, I just want to make it clear the title is a bit of a misnomer. I'm not an expert in international animal law. More accurately, and to echo Pam and Joyce's keynote address on Friday night, I direct CAL's, the Center for Animal Law Studies, efforts internationally to make animal law mainstream. And we think it's very important at CAL's. 25 years we've been doing this, 10 years the Center for Animal Law Studies has existed. We take that responsibility seriously, and we feel like we are in the best position. We're very well suited to go abroad and help to make animal law as mainstream as possible, to have it taught in law schools all over the country. And that's more accurate of what I do. I feel very fortunate to be in that role. As part of that, I direct the animal law program, or the animal law LLM degree program. And in 2013, we began accepting international students. Our first international student was from Switzerland, and I just listed the countries that have been represented currently in the program and in the past. So you can see we're spreading. And as part of my travels when I go around, I'm fortunate enough to be able to talk about a scholarship opportunity that we have because of the generosity of donors. So what we are able to offer is a full scholarship, room and board, tuition, everything is covered for 3 international attorneys every year. It's very competitive, and we're focused primarily on the continent of Africa. And these are some of our past scholarship recipients. The first was Jim Karani from Kenya. He's currently now back in Kenya as head of legal affairs of Wildlife Direct. The next is Justice Nzioki Makau. He was co-founder of the Tsavo Trust, which is based in Tsavo National Park in Kenya. And he's back in Kenya as a judge. And as well, we have Koi Gachui, and she is a part of the Wildlife Crimes Unit as a prosecutor. And they're back in Kenya, and they're back there doing the work, and they're precisely what the aim of our program is to create new animal law experts in countries where animal law is new, it's developing, it's young. The other part of my job is to speak about animal law to any kind of audience I can get. And sometimes it's not much of an audience. There's 6 people, 5 people, 4 people. But just this last year, I have traveled to Morocco, Madagascar, Kenya, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And the 2 pictures I'm showing you are just illustrations of working with young lawyers at the University of Johannesburg. Amy Wilson, who's a current LLM now from South Africa, helped organize a wonderful event with lawyers, advocates in Johannesburg to hear Pam and I speak about animal law. And I just got back from Zimbabwe, speaking to the University of Zimbabwe's law school, and I had no idea what to expect. And you'll hear from Ever about her organization, Speak Out for Animals, and the wonderful work that they're doing. I have never spoke to a crowd that big. There were students spilling out into the hallways, and they were all there to hear about animal law. And I was blown away at their enthusiasm, their questions, and shocked that it happened in Zimbabwe, where you can have all these thoughts about what you think Zimbabwe is like or what they care about and wildlife, but these students are fired up. And these are some upcoming international events I just wanted to highlight and let you know what is going on in the world of animal law internationally. The Africa Animal Welfare Conference happened this month in Kenya, and although it was environmentally focused, they talked about animals in research, animal abuse, wildlife, and they talked about the whole spectrum of animal law issues. I was asked to speak at that conference with Pam, and I had to make a choice. Should I speak to Zimbabwean law students, or should I go to the conference in Kenya? And it was an easy decision for me because we had 2, 3 LLM graduates of our program who were able to speak at that conference, who were able to be better representatives of animal law issues in Kenya, in Africa, and speak as the experts in the field in their countries. So it was an easy decision for me just to stay in Zimbabwe and talk to the students about animal education and opportunities, because now the program is working. What we're trying to do is working. There are experts in the country able to do that. And there's a Minding Animals conference in Mexico City where we'll have LLMs in the program currently who will be speaking. Cows will be represented. The Global Animal Law Conference is put on in partnership with other Michigan State University, Autonomous University of Barcelona. It will be at the University of Hong Kong in May. And I am still working diligently with partners in Kenya to put on a particular conference focused on animal law, not just all of the various issues in the environment and wildlife, but animal law focused specifically. We're shooting for May of 2018. And the last thing I want to mention is what I think is very important when you're traveling abroad talking about animal law. We all know that it hits people in different ways when you tell them what you do or what you're interested in. And for me personally, when I'm traveling to Africa and different countries, I am a very white person. And I'm very sensitive to the fact when I'm coming into a country, I want to know how to deliver this message of what animal law is and not have it fall on deaf ears. And I think it's really important that you get to know the country you're in as best you can, the people, what they're dealing with, the economic interests, the social interests, the culture. And to do that, you really have to spend time there. And you get to know people and you know what resonates with them. And so part of that, on the side of my other job, I also spend time on the ground with the rangers in Zimbabwe. And if any of you are interested in doing this, come find me, because I think it's really important in our work that we maintain a connection to all of the animals, human and non-human, on the ground. And you need to have a direct, I need one. I need to have a direct relationship. I need to see, I need to know what they're going through. And through those experiences, you can learn how best to deliver this message, what works. Maybe it's music, maybe it's storytelling, maybe it's experiences with animals in the wild, so that everyone can see how important animal law is. And I'm so excited to continue to promote the program and these students, or graduates now, that you'll hear from and the amazing work that they're doing. So thank you for coming.
I will start by introducing myself again. So this instrumental playing is an educational tool we are using as Speak Out for Animals. Africans like dancing. Africans like music. So in order to catch them, to catch their attention, to introduce this unique subject of animal law, we use music and dance. Enjoy the instrumental and think about the lyrics that are going to come out of this song. So this instrumental is being distributed to all the schools in Zimbabwe, from primary, tertiary, and university students. And it's a song competition where we have asked students to come up with lyrics that talk of animal protection, that talk of animal conservation, that talk of value of animals. Anyone who's going to come up with good lyrics for this instrumental will get a book prize of $500 going towards their schools, promoting animal welfare using music and arts. So I will introduce myself. My name is Eva Chinoda, but in Zimbabwe they now call me Advocate Eva Vimbai Chinoda, after I attained the LLM, Masters in Animal Law. In my country, titles are very important. And once you spend at least 6 years studying or specializing in a certain area, that's when you can only be called advocate. Now, I started learning about animal laws, specifically wildlife laws, in 2010 when I graduated. In Zimbabwe law schools, we're not taught about wildlife law, yet we have an abundance of wildlife law. So I learned wildlife law on my own, out of my own interest. And in 2012, I had the privilege of being a volunteer at Parks and Wildlife for 6 months, where I came up with a training program and went to all the parks in Zimbabwe, training the rangers about wildlife law. And in 2015, when Cecil the lion was shot, that is when I was called back to parks and work with them as a legal officer and assist them with the Cecil lion case. So between 2012 and 2015, I went to the Ministry of Justice and worked as a public prosecutor. When I was there, people at Parks and Wildlife knew I was really passionate about animal protection, so they would call me and ask me, we have this situation, which act or what charge do we use for this situation? And I would just do that out of my own will, because no lawyer was interested about animal law, or no lawyer was interested about wildlife law. So that's how I got involved in this work. So in 2015, into 2016, I was part of the core CITES COP17 team, where I was advising the government on what we should do with our elephants. So there was a proposal that they wanted our elephants to be in Appendix 1, and being Zimbabwean and valuing our wildlife, I advised the government that we wanted to have our elephant population in Appendix 2, because we rely on our wildlife for livelihood. So Zimbabwe subscribes to the principle of sustainable utilization, meaning that when we see our wildlife, we see it as a natural resource that should benefit present and future generations. We also we have what we call the wildlife-based land reform policy, which is a policy that came about around 2000. So initially, we had about 3,000 white commercial farmers which were residing in the farms. And we have 13% of our land being dedicated to wildlife. So when we had this wildlife land reform program, we had about 85,000 families being relocated into those rural areas. Now you can imagine what it means for the animals when they were just habiting with just reasonable 3,000 animal lovers, and then you just relocate 85,000 people. So now there is pressure on the resources as a result of the wildlife land reform policy. The food chain has been distributed. Humans also want the meat. The lions also want the meat. So a lot has been happening, and this has caused to an increase in human and wildlife conflict. We also have quite a number of animal welfare organizations. And we have the SPCA, we have the Veterinary Animal Welfare Association. We have quite a number. Personally, I know about 20 animal welfare organizations in Zimbabwe. And we also have animal welfare as an academic subject being taught in veterinary schools and in agricultural schools. But we don't have this subject being taught in law schools. So this is a map of Zimbabwe, and all those dark green areas that you see reflect the national parks in the country. So 13% of the country's land is dedicated for wildlife. So obviously, having such a precious resource to us has brought about the introduction of so many legal instruments to protect this wildlife. Now, let me just take you through the current statistics that we have of elephants being poisoned with cyanide. So what is happening these days is that we used to have poachers use firearms to kill elephants. And they now discovered that the rangers now know how to catch them. And now they're introducing cyanide, where they inject cyanide in the water holes, or they can just inject cyanide in an orange, and then an animal can come and feed, and they die. So since 2013, each and every year, we are losing elephants as a result of cyanide poisoning. And these are the wildlife crime statistics for 2015 and 2016. So we've had, in 2015, we had 230 cases of wildlife crime, and we had 467 people being arrested. And we only had about 149 convictions, and right now, in 2017, we have 176 cases that are still pending. In 2016, we had slightly an increase of number of wildlife crimes to 239, and an increase of the number of people that were arrested. I think this reflects and shows the work that is being done on the ground, and we also had an increase of the number of people that were arrested, and a slight decrease in the number of people, in the number of cases that are pending. So, yes, I've talked about the arrests and the pending cases, but I just want to explain the penalty levels that are involved. So in Zimbabwe, we value our wildlife. The most valued animal is the elephant, which is valued at 50,000. And the value of a dog in Zimbabwe, if you get a dog for $20, you would have, that's a lot, because our value is placed on wildlife. So the penalty level, you find that we have two categories of animals. We have what we call specially protected animals. These, if you are involved with illegal possession or poaching of a specially protected animal, like a lion, or like a pangolin or a python, it attracts a penalty of 9 years, mandatory sentence, no fine. But if it's another animal, like an elephant or a lion, they're not specially protected, because we believe we have an abundance of those. The penalty is $300 or 1 year imprisonment. For any other type of animal, domestic or agricultural animal, the average penalty level is $200. So I've given you a brief background about the country where we're working and what is happening there. And I just want to talk a little bit about the LLM program and the connection with our work. So I was told about the LLM program sometime in December, and I met Natasha in January 2016. It took me, I think, about 5 months to apply to take this LLM program because I wasn't sure whether I was going to come to study about dogs and cats. And even when I was telling people about I'm going to America to study animal law, people were like, who goes to America and study dogs and cats? So I checked on the course outline, and I saw that yes, there was wildlife law and there was environmental law, and I was happy because I was like, at least I can get the formal education to learn about wildlife law and to learn about environmental law. I didn't even know that there were various legal instruments that protect animals, like the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, the Quelea Control, the Bees Act. I didn't know anything about any legislation that protected any other animal except wildlife. So all this information, I got to know it when I was studying my LLM and when I was given work to be a research assistant, just researching about the animal welfare organizations and researching about the current laws that exist. So for those of you who are still thinking, should I take the LLM program, this program is the best. And this program is not for people who are looking for employment. This program is for history makers. If you know you're a history maker, determined and inspired to do great things, take the LLM program. You won't go wrong. So as I was doing my LLM program, I took the nonprofit animal law class, and I'm very happy because when I talked to my supervisor about the project that I wanted to do for my LLM program, they agreed that I can register a nonprofit here in the United States as my project. So whilst others were writing notes in class that this is how you register, or whilst others were also taking notes on how you create a website, I would go home after taking the notes and create the website and register the organization. So by the time I graduated, I had a nonprofit that was up and running, and standing in front of you is clear evidence of the result of the work that I did during my LLM program. So I formed an organization called Speak Out for Animals, and those two, that's Priska, she's a lawyer, and that's Moses, he's an ecologist. Those are the two full-time volunteers that are on the ground that I work with for all the work that I will show you that we've done since April up to date. So our organization is solely meant for the purpose of educating people about animal laws through music and arts and conventional ways. And you might ask, why education? We chose to educate people for the simple reason that education is a powerful weapon that can be used to change the world. When I went through the LLM program, I was changed in the way I view animals, in the way I value animals. And because I'm a beneficiary of this program, I believe I can also make a change. And I believe I can also influence someone to make a change. So we're into community education. This is a community in Norton. It's a fishing community. This community has a problem of human-wildlife conflict, so many snake bites, because they're also into illegal fishing. So we decided to go to that community and to just educate them about what the law says, that if you want to fish, get a fishing permit, and if you want to just inform them about the laws that are there, and for them to engage in their activities legally and formally. And this is another community we went to. It's called Gokwe. Here we have some of the people that had problems with lions. So the manner in which we educate the communities is we go there, we tell them about animal behavior, because we have ecologists ecologists as part of our volunteers. They know and they've studied about animal behavior. And we also have lawyers who then tell them that in as much as you're not happy with these animals, this is what the law says, and try to abide with the law. And in July, I went back to Zimbabwe and I trained 10 lawyers. And we had a certificate ceremony at the end of it. And that is one of the lawyers that I trained. And we also managed to create a curriculum to train animal law in Zimbabwe. And then that is in that picture, that shows the University of Zimbabwe law students that you saw, that Natasha showed you earlier on. So as Speak Out for Animals, we started as a group which is more like CELDEF, but we call it Speak Out for Animals Student Chapter. So initially, we had 49 people register for it, but when Natasha came, we had about 200 people who attended her talk. And afterwards, we then had a field visit at the animal sanctuary. Now, because I had 49 people who had signed up, I thought 49 students would want to go to the animal sanctuary. And after Natasha told them about animal law and the work that we're doing, I had about 140 people wanting to go to the sanctuary. My phone was buzzing, and Moses and Prisca were saying, we have too many people, what do we do? I'm like, sort yourselves out. I'm only sponsoring 65 people to go to the sanctuary. So now they're asking, when is the next trip we want to go? I'm like, but when we said we're starting this thing, people were not interested. Now that people are now getting more excited and people are saying, when is the next trip? And I told them, relax, it's coming. So that is Twala Animal Law Sanctuary, where they were just seeing different animals, lions, peacocks. And the funny thing is, like, for some people who grow up in the city, they've never seen this wildlife. So that connection where you don't only talk about it, but you also involve the practical aspect has also just made people being interested. I think what really excited me, and when I saw that there's hope in Zimbabwe with this animal law thing, I spent about 3 months with 200 followers and 200 likes. When Natasha went and when they went to the sanctuary, I had 200 in 1 week. I'm like, okay. So I think the more effort, also the more people get interested, and the more the work grows. We're also involved in lobbying. In July, I worked with the Zimbabwean Parliament, and I was telling them about the wildlife laws in the country and the reforms that need to be worked on. And right now, the first work Speak Out for Animals got was on the donkey issue. So right now, we have a situation where there's a certain company which is establishing a donkey abattoir. And they're supposed to start running in November. And we have 150,000 donkeys in Zimbabwe. And this abattoir has a potential of processing 70 donkeys a day. So we had the other animal welfare organizations write to us and say, you are the lawyers. You're the only animal lawyers in the country. What are you doing about it? So we wrote a petition, and if all goes well, we're supposed to engage the parliament on Friday on this donkey issue as Speak Out for Animals. We also have a situation with the baby elephants. They're being captured and they're being taken to Chinese zoos. And we also had another animal welfare organization saying, you are the lawyers. What are you doing about this? So we have challenges. Zimbabwe is a very politically sensitive environment. So our work, we try by all means to make sure that we manage the politics that is involved. We also have economic challenges. People in our country are poor. And to introduce the field of animal law, or to also talk about freedom from hunger, freedom from thirst for animals, is something that we need to introduced with caution and make sure that people understand, because they'll be like, why are you telling us to look after animals when we can't even look after ourselves? So we need to have a strategic way of introducing the subject and making sure that we manage the resistance on the ground. We also have social and cultural barriers, and we also have poor law enforcement. The police officers, they're not taught about animal laws, so they don't enforce the law, yet it's there. And then we also have trivialization of cases by the judiciary. So our 2018 strategic plan is that we raise public awareness. We also want to participate in the wildlife legislation review that is happening right now, and we want to also take the lead in reforming the animal laws that are currently in place, since they were enacted in the 1980s. So there's need for reform. And we also want to start SOFA student groups in all the 3 law schools that are there in Zimbabwe. So last but not least, I'll end with a summary of who SOFA is and what we are doing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. So this morning I will be talking about the development of animal law in France, and how as an animal law graduates from Lewis and Clark, I can contribute to developing the field of animal law in France. So as an introduction, I will speak about the recent development of animal law in France. And I will start by pointing out the specificities of France as far as the law and education are concerned. So first of all, France abides by a civil law system. This is not a common law country. And what it means is that it heavily relies on codified law. and there's no stare decisis rule. Legal education in civil law countries reflects the somewhat rigid structure of civil law. So it means that if you have no code of animal law, your discipline virtually doesn't exist. But there are ways around this, and actually, which we will explore over this presentation. And actually, animal law might be one of the few legal disciplines to have managed to institutionalize in universities before the creation of a dedicated code. Other civil law countries include Latin American countries as well as Southern European countries. So hopefully this presentation will be relevant to other countries as well. Another specificities of France is that the French legal education is 5 years. There's no college as in the US and France. And those 5 years include 3 years of general legal education and 2 years of specialization. University is publicly funded, as French tradition considers education as a right. As a result, privately funded programs are quite uncommon, and funding wasn't a problem until the government funding kept decreasing in the last 10 to 20 years, which has become an issue, as you can imagine, and makes it even more challenging for new disciplines such as animal law to emerge in universities in France, and especially in law schools. However, despite all those seemingly insurmountable obstacles, animal law has considerably developed in France. It has become an actual autonomous legal discipline. So it first started as a field of animal studies, as a sort of a discipline within social studies since the 1990s. Especially in philosophical studies. So you've probably heard about Derrida, but we have also important contributors to animal studies in France who unfortunately have never been translated in English. And animal law first came included in social studies curricula progressively since the last 10 years. And now there are at least 3 law schools in France which offer animal law courses. France also has one animal law review directed by the distinguished French animal law scholar, Professor Marguenot, since 2009, and which considerably contributed to the development and recognition of animal law as an autonomous legal discipline. Since last month, and I'm particularly proud of it, the first ever clinical project in animal law was created in France in one of the most prestigious law schools in Paris. And I will go back to the role of legal clinics, which are a concept imported from the US, and the role they have in developing animal law in France. So at this point in France, there is still no master's degree in animal law, although one first notable step has been the creation of a short program under the direction of Professor Marguenot, who also founded the first animal law review in France. And that program is open to anyone, not just lawyers, anyone who's really seeking to get an expertise, a basic expertise, fundamental expertise in animal law. The creation of a degree in animal law in France would certainly help granting the discipline a recognition it's still lacking, and it would also respond to the desires of French civil society, who is increasingly interested in animal protection. But also, given the structure of legal education in France, it could also present the risk of isolating a field of study in an already very compartmented legal education culture. And of course, an additional risk of creating an animal law degree regards job opportunities for graduates are as nonprofits in France, and I would even say Europe, are not as numerous and certainly not as rich as in the US, as in the Anglo-American world. And also the legal profession mostly seeks out more traditional skills than just animal law related skills. So an alternative solution would be to effectively include animal law in an animal law aspect in every field of the law, criminal law, civil law, environmental law, etc., and a more general survey course as it currently exists in some American law school. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because, of course, from France, the animal law community sees the US as an example, but we also have to keep in mind that we're dealing with very specific cultural aspects in our country too. So a little roadmap for this presentation. So I will first give some perspective on how we can enrich French research in animal law, basically by connecting the research that is currently conducted in France to the rest of the world and vice versa. And also the role of animal law in France, which is basically, as anywhere else, connecting activists with policymakers to actually change the law or make it at least more effective. So I am of the opinion that the study of animal law in France can only develop further by opening up to the rest of the world. And that obviously means getting to know other legal cultures' work on animal law, as well as sharing and exchanging ideas with other researchers as to enrich everybody's work and make it probably less French-centered than it currently is. One big obstacle we have in France is that we need students and researchers to speak English more, which is something quite hard to do because academics around the world now mostly speak English. They do not speak French anymore, so it's kind of something we have to work on, that indeed English is the new French and we have to learn English, otherwise nobody's going to speak French just for us. So we can actually enjoy the opportunity, the many opportunities the EU framework offers to acquire and improve language skills. Language skills are very useful in legal research related to animal protection, as things are moving incredibly fast around the world. Some legal concepts cannot be translated or even understood unless one speaks the language or is familiar with the culture. So we need as many people as we can to work together to, connect all those work together. In that perspective, there already exist important centers of animal law research in Europe. Of course, the University of Barcelona, which offers the only graduate degree in animal studies in Europe so far, and which also includes a legal component in its program. The University of Basel also, until recently, offered a comprehensive postgraduate research program fully dedicated to animal law, and which granted the title of Doctor in Law, and this program was fully bilingual in German and English, which obviously facilitates that exchange that scholars can get involved in. Another example of a very good initiative is the Educational Group for Animal Law Studies in Continental Europe, launched by a group of animal law scholars in France, Swiss, and in Spain to promote research and education throughout Europe. What is still missing, though, is really that bridge between the Anglo-American world and European legal cultures, and I would even say even beyond. We've just heard about what's going on in Zimbabwe and in Africa, but as you probably already know, lots of things are happening in Asia, in Latin America, basically everywhere in the world, and that's something we should be really excited for. A good example of how to import something from abroad are the creation of legal clinics. So legal clinics in France were imported from American law schools, And they really serve, I see the potential of those legal clinics in serving the development of animal law in France and even throughout Europe. So why legal clinics? Why are they so useful and successful in France? Well, basically for the same reasons they are successful in the US. They provide students with more practical experience, and that's even truer in France, where traditional legal education delivered in universities is often seen as highly theoretical by both the students and the legal profession. It also helps the communities. It increases and facilitates access to legal services. Access to justice is a human right under the EU and the French Constitution, and I think legal clinic serves that right pretty well. It also gets the legal profession, the researchers, and the professors to work closely and develop synergies to address complex legal issues. And that's true for any legal discipline, but extremely relevant also for animal law. And last but not least, legal clinics provide a flexible educational tool which allows for adaptation to cultural specificities. So a good example of that is the Sciences Po Law School Clinic, which is not a legal clinic, but operates in a more general framework in cooperation with the International Relations University there. And this is where we created the first ever clinical project in animal law this year with 2 students from the law school and 1 student from the International Relations School of Sciences Po. So what's the role for animal law scholars in France? So let's see what's left to do for scholars committed to improve the lives of animals at a more national level. That calls for a short contextual background on the specificities of animal protection movement in France. So I won't go back to the genesis of the animal protection movement in France in the mid-19th, which is pretty similar to the British and American one. But let's say that more recently, the animal protection movement gained momentum as a result of the expansion of factory farming all over Europe. The first factory farm in France, the appearance of factory farms in France dates back to the 2000s, while the animal protection movement structures itself quite rapidly, roughly 10 years following the expansion of factory farmings in France. The French animal protection movement is different from the American one, although it also sort of reproduces that classical division between welfarists and abolitionists. Some of the groups composing the spectrum of animal law protection movement in France are much more politicized. So the abolitionist section includes a radical fringe, safe label that as anti-speciesists, who are against, so they are vegan, but they're against veganism as a mere consumerist lifestyle and committed to end animal exploitation, abiding by a very Marxist perspective of class struggle. Such movement is increasingly more vocal and is rooted in French political tradition of anti-fascism and anarcho-syndicalism, as well as the Israeli animal liberation movement. On the welfare side, we also have a very political opposition to neoliberal views, critical of free trade agreements, which they see as the sort of responsible for the expansion of factory farming, and they resist veganism as a lifestyle, which they view as an expression of a renewed economic and cultural imperialism. They do not necessarily oppose veganism. Some might even actively encourage it, but they mostly fight for meat reductionism and for what they call a post-modern, sustainable and small animal agriculture. So obviously this is very simplified, but I just wanted to give you the elements that we animal law scholars in France have to take into account in order to really respond to the needs of the French society. So what is exactly needed from us? I think theoretical debates on animal law, on the protection of on animal protection as a constitutional principle, or the legal status of animals in the civil code, are not are very interesting, but they're not seen as being helpful by the base. Indeed, activists in the last few years have become increasingly more critical of the law as an effective tool to protect animals from the worst forms of abuses, and have engaged in a much more radical approach to animal protection that resulted in polarizing the debate between the different stakeholders. The creation of the first program, which I mentioned in animal law, which I mentioned earlier, by Professor Marguerite, actually attempted to address what Professor Marguerite calls a law-phobic approach to animal protection, and he considers that academics are here to offer a comprehensive education to people, while bringing the government's attention on the matter of animal protection through a more institutionalized and legitimate structure than small nonprofits. I personally agree very much with that approach, and would even add that researchers committed to improve the lives of animals in France definitely need to explore more pragmatic path in their research, and typically by providing materials to policymakers. Unlike the US, I think that France is lucky to have a pretty sympathetic administration and many politicians across the political spectrum who are sympathetic to the cause of animal protection. There are a lot of successes that could be easily achieved by targeting different and not so theoretical issues. An example of such a low-hanging fruit would be simply exploring enforcement mechanisms of already numerous existing anti-cruelty laws. So for instance, placing live streaming cameras in slaughterhouses to enhance enforcement. We know that it might infringe on workers' rights, so how can animal law research address that type of issue? And that's where the legal clinics come into play by typically engaging in empirical research and empirical work. A second aspect that is much needed in animal law research in France is adopting a more multidisciplinary approach in research by working with experts in fields that are deemed more legitimate to bring attention to animals. So typically environmental law would be a perfect ally, as environment has its own department in France and has lately become the core of French diplomacy. Factory farming, as you all know, accounts for a large part of greenhouse emissions, in addition to being intrinsically cruel to animals. So animal advocates should probably explore synergies with the environmental movement on that specific issue. And once again, looking at what has been done abroad could be really helpful, typically looking at how it happened in the US or how it didn't happen, so that we don't make the same mistakes in France. And finally, French scholars should know to be better educators and should probably be less activist in the way they are teaching and in the way they are teaching in classes. I think they should engage more in conversations with all the stakeholders to have a better understanding of the mechanisms at work in the law and in society as a whole. So a good example of that would be typically the discussion on ritual slaughter. It's really interesting to see how it is approached in France in the academia, which is basically to either ignore it or just saying that it should be illegal. I think instead that religious and animal law scholars should engage together in research to study the different meanings of the different methods of ritual slaughter and what it means today, now that agriculture has achieved its industrialization. So as a conclusion, there are a lot of promising developments so far, but also, as always, a lot that is left to do, a lot that is left to be achieved to expand and enrich research, as well as to better unite society and the role academia has to play in uniting a better society and policymakers. Thank you.
So if anybody has any questions, just come up to the mic.
Oh, hi. Thanks very much for the talk. Can you talk about Cecil the lion, please? You said that you had done some work with him about it.
So what happened with Cecil the lion case is that right now, as we speak, it hasn't been finalized. It's one of those pending cases that I was telling you about. We obviously didn't prosecute Dentist Palmer because we didn't have the laws that would enable us to do that. So what we managed to do is to prosecute the professional hunter because he was the one who had the dentist, and he was the one who was supposed to guide that hunt. So they appealed, and the matter was taken also to Constitutional Court because he was not happy about the world reaction and the pressure that was there. And so the case right now is still pending. The trial hasn't started, and we're hoping that the case will start soon and will be finalized. Because of the public pressure that was there, it got into the court, and then they filed a constitutional appeal, and then it took forever, and then it went back to the magistrate court, and now it's getting into court as summons since it was removed off remand. So that's the current position for Cecil the Lion case.
And so is the one that's leading the legal battle there? Or how is it going through it?
Sorry?
Are you asking like the current legal situation? Right.
The government, I mean,
The-
they're prosecuting it. The government is
Yeah.
prosecuting. Are you asking who? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they are, and just to add to that, Zimbabwe, even though you might have preconceived notions of how seriously they take these crimes, they just sentenced a rhino poacher, Majongwe, to 44 years, which is huge for poaching. It's one of the largest sentences for rhino poaching in that country and in southern Africa.
So for Natasha and Ever, how do you address people who really support big game hunting in Africa and think it's actually beneficial because people might pay to go there and it can benefit the park financially long term? Do you support that? Are you against it? And how do you deal with people who support that?
Well, like what I said, Zimbabwe relies on this wildlife for revenue and for conservation work. And we subscribe to the policy of sustainable utilization. And we also make quite a lot from people who come to hunt. Now, personally, after going through the LLM program, when I go back home, I would want them to promote ecotourism. People should come and see the beauty of wildlife, take pictures, and that way we can also make much more from ecotourism than promoting hunting. But as a government principle, we do promote hunting because we get revenue, and that's how we sustain our conservation work and all the administrative work that is involved in taking care of the animals. So come to Zimbabwe and see the animals.
And I echo what Vimbai says. This does come up a lot in Zimbabwe, and the work that we partner with the anti-poaching rangers in a conservancy. It's a hunting conservancy. So the conversation is different in Zimbabwe and South Africa than it is in Kenya. And it comes up a lot, and we talk about personal values. For me, it's a moral issue, and you'll find other people who live in Zimbabwe and they work and they're anti-poaching rangers, and they have to work with hunters. You have to have the conversation, and you have to recognize historically a lot of that land was set aside for hunting, so in that regard, that's great. Because there was that element to it, but then you'll hear from people that hunting, it actually, the numbers don't add up. They get money, but they don't get much money. I mean, conservation in Southern Africa is based on philanthropy, and unless people come and demand that they want, photo safaris and different kinds of tourism, it won't change. There has to be a shift, and there has to be more creativity than going back to hunting. So it's coming up with different creative ideas to find value in wildlife besides just the monetary value.
Thank you so much for your comments, all three of you. My question was for Alice. So in the United States, one of the best ways to actually fight factory farming is through these third-party certifications that are on food labels. Global Animal Partnership is one of them, animal welfare approved. And the one that I know of in France is Label Rouge or Label Rouge. And I'm wondering, if you're familiar, and then also what role that label and potentially other labels play in actually impacting the consciousness of consumers. And also my understanding may be that, at least with Label Rouge, a pasture-based program with slower-growing poultry, it's not always necessarily as much about the welfare of the animal primarily. It's often, this is a better tasting bird, or there are other values that play in as well. So I'm just wondering with the value of third-party certifications. Thank you.
So that's an excellent question. Actually, the clinical project I'm supervising is working on the issue of labeling, and so the first task we have is identifying if even that would be useful, because I think we're just hitting really on a cultural component of French society and maybe even European society, which considers that power is to the citizens. It's not to the consumers. We don't live in a society where market is underregulated. We live in a society where if people are not happy with what they're seeing, they go vote. We have a different system of voting, which is much more direct democracy. So it's very complicated. French society is definitely changing, and I can see a lot of change myself among how consumer behavior is increasingly impacting practices within the industry, but that's left to be explored. As to the labeling issue regarding the labels that already exist, they definitely don't address animal welfare. It's sort of a side effect, so if you're interested in having good poultry, there's a chance that the animals you're raising within that labeling system will be better treated than in a factory farming, but that's definitely not the main focus of the label. So this is why we came up with that idea of creating a label that would be definitely more focused on animal welfare than gastronomical concerns.
This question is for Ever. You brought up the difficulty of introducing animal law issues to people who are having prominent economic issues. For example, you go into a community and ask people to change their lifestyle and potentially affect their livelihood for the betterment of animals. How do you address these issues with the people without making them feel unimportant or not valued?
Thank you. So, one of the ways and strategies that we've decided to use is the music and arts, simple ways of just communicating the law. And we are also using storytelling, because when you go to the rural areas, they will tell you that my husband was killed with a lion, was killed with an elephant. And it's obviously not easy for you to also just tell them, protect the animals and leave the animals. You need to be sympathetic. That's why you saw even in our video that we have the human element involved. We cannot make this work without being sympathetic on the humans and without giving them an ear and understanding their concerns. And one of the things that we've decided to do as Speak Out for Animals is we will first raise awareness and educate them in a polite way, understanding their economic challenges. But the law is the law. The law doesn't change. We tell them that the law says this, so do not do this. But sometimes you find some people become victims as a result of ignorance. Those we're going to help and give assistance. Like, for example, we have a cultural behavior where people think that if you eat a pangolin, you live long. And people have gotten the pangolins in the bush, and some of them have been unfortunate to be caught by the police before they've even, eaten the pangolin, and they've gone to jail 9 years because it's a cultural thing that they're used to. So we want them to know the law, and we introduce the law using relaxed ways and storytelling. We're sorry this is what happened, but this is what the law says. If you have a problem with animals, call us, call ZIMBABWE, they'll come and help you. And if you have a problem, call us and Speak Out for Animals. We can even represent you if you're genuine and if you didn't know that is what the law says. But we'll start by educating and raising the awareness in a polite and in relaxed ways, and in vernacular language. That's the other thing. We're just teaching them about the law in Shona, because most of the people that live with these animals, they are in the rural areas. A few people live in towns and live with the animals.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, please join me in thanking our speakers again.